Hello and welcome everybody to the next event in the IT security paradigm shift hosted by Aiden Technologies. Very excited to have a great panel with us today to discuss a very interesting topic, which Aiden participates in quite a bit, desired state. And we're going to talk about, is this a myth or reality? What are things that are involved in it? Here's our agenda for today. We're going to go through introductions first with my esteemed colleagues here on the panel. We really have three fantastic luminaries in IT and IT security to join us today. And we're going to discuss the three main topics on what is modern state and is it achievable via the cloud? What are innovative technologies that are enabling organizations to provide secure and desirable end user experiences? And we're going to discuss how IT security leaders are attaining high levels of cyber hygiene. Dealing with expanding attack surface and hybrid workforce, work from home, work from anywhere, everything that's happening out there today. We're going to get some final thoughts towards the end from our panelists. We're going to do some key takeaways, which I'm going to try to sum up for everyone. And then we have a brief announcement at the end. So we hope you'll stick through with us to the end and hear that. And with that, without further ado, let me introduce our panel. First off, I'm Josh Aaron. I'm the CEO and founder of Aiden, and I'm really pleased to be hosting today Pat Benoit from CBRE, Anthony Johnson from Delve Risk, and Diana Kelly from Security Curve. Diana, would you like to go first and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me here, Josh. So Diane Kelly, I have been in IT for over 30 years and almost all of that in security because I started out as a network admin and I built out a global network and somebody got on my network and I said, never again. So at that point I pivoted over to security and I haven't looked back. But a fun fact is that when I decided to focus on security of networks and not just network building, someone told me that I was wasting my time because we were going to solve all these security problems, no problem, and that I would be limiting my career. And here it is 27 years later, and we have not solved all the security problems yet.
The gift that keeps on giving in technology. Thank you very much, Dan. And Anthony, why don't you go second?
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Anthony Johnson, former CISO of multiple organizations, GE Treasury, Fannie Mae, JP Morgan. Been in the security space for 20 plus years as well. It's a crazy fun world. I would actually ask, have we solved any security problems in the last 20 years? So I'm excited about it to chat today.
Thank you very much. And Pat, we'll go to you to wrap it up and then we'll jump right into our topics.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm glad to be here. Pat Benoit. I've actually got y'all beat with respect to technology. I've been in over 40 years, so in technology. Now, security, I've always had that as a remit, but of course, it wasn't until about 25 years ago we really started talking about security seriously and making it a priority. I didn't pivot and go focused 100% on security until the last 5 to 6 years or so. Lots of diverse experience and delivery executive at Dell and worked at Experian, built business partner programs, built security programs at some startups and things like that. So excited to be here.
Thank you, Pat. That's great. And without further ado, I'm going to stop the share and let's jump right into our first topic, which is what is desired state? What are we all talking about when we use the term desired state? I'm not even sure that everybody has the same definition of what desired state is. And maybe, Anthony, why don't we start with you? Why don't you give us some perspective on how you view desired state and, is it achievable via the cloud or otherwise?
So I think it's a really fun, the framing of the question is fun. It's like saying, hey, what is fit, right? Fit is very different for every single person. Some people might be like, we can agree though that certain things are not fit, right? I'll probably get canceled somewhere for how I kind of think about it. There's certain aspects of like, hey, that's just unhealthy. That's not fit. And so when we talk about desired state, I think it really does come down to what is the organization trying to do, right? How fast are they really trying to move? And then ultimately, how many people and resources are they trying to strike the balance on it? In my mind, desired state is that great balance of automation that enables your people to solve good people type problems, and you let technology solve the routine, repetitive, automated type of things. But I'll just pause there because I can probably go on forever about it.
Very good. Diana, what's your perspective on desired state? How are you seeing that with your customers and people you're advising?
Yeah, I think Anthony made such a great point about it's unique to each organization. There's the old saying that risk is a very personal decision. I live in New Hampshire, and we actually are the only state in the United States that doesn't have an adult seatbelt law. Children need to, so that it becomes your choice whether you're going to buckle up or not in New Hampshire, and some people decide to take the risk. Many of us don't, and some people do, because risk is ultimately a personal choice for individuals and for organizations too. So desired state is about having that informed awareness about what's right for you and your organization. There's no perfect. Way back, before we started to get the resilience mindset, there was a lot of, I want absolute security. I would get, CEOs telling me, make sure that no one can ever break into our network. Well, I wish, but there's no absolute guarantee, and there's no perfect security for organizations. But a desired state is when the company is informed and aware and says, this is where we want to get to. This is the risk appetite we have. These are the priorities that are important to us. This is the compliance and regulatory overhead that we say that we have to meet. This is how we're going to answer SIGs to get new partners, right? That all becomes part of the desired state. And when you bring that together, then you can create a plan on how do we accomplish that in cloud? How do we use the tools that are available to us and pick the right ones to create the ability to meet that desired state? But it is, as Anthony said, that desired state is going to be different for every organization.
Yeah, Diane, it's spot on. And it's funny because I've had CEOs ask me the same question or say the same thing. And usually we use a nice Texas saying, which is, speed costs money. How fast do you want to go? So, I asked the CEO, how much money are you willing to spend to keep your house from being broken into or burned down or destroyed from natural disaster or whatever else? It's the exact same thing. But for me, desired state, echo all the things that Diane and Anthony have said, but also add to it that desired state seems to sound like a destination, but it's not. It's a journey. And if we look at it as a destination, we're going to be chasing all over the place, the next new shiny object. It'll be squirrel every day. And so instead, we need to have a plan of where we think that desired state is, but then we need to approach it as a journey and take reasonable bites out of that pie so that we can get to where we want to get to.
Pat, that's really interesting. And I often, as Diane was talking and I heard when Anthony said, I was thinking, we always view desired state as a journey, for sure, for ourselves. But funny enough, we tend to see it as an absolute for others, or a condition, meaning like third-party risk, vendor risk, due diligence, all that kind of stuff, right? We want all of our suppliers and our vendors to be in a particular desired state that we're going to try to mandate, right? So I'd be curious to know how the panel reacts to that.
And isn't it funny, in technology, we got rid of the state and went to stateless years ago. Everything we do, we look towards stateless environments, and so, but we still want to call this desired state. So,
yeah, I mean it's so true, right? It's like how many times have security folks said that, hey, that assessment is just point in time. It's the second that the assessor leaves, you're in a different state within your network and in your environment, your security posture. And what are we doing? We're saying, I want an SBOM for your software. And that SBOM is point in time when they printed the dependencies, right? Is it a live continuous SBOM? It should be software bill of materials for people that haven't had the great pleasure of being wrapped up in reporting around these yet. And the same with information gathering. When we have questionnaires from our vendors, it's such a great point. They give us a point in time. What we really are ultimately going to need is not a questionnaire that you filled out, but a way to have some sort of continuous, ongoing knowledge about what state that partner is in.
Well, let's not leave out our other partner in crime, the client, the customer themselves, because if we're approaching a business solely as this is what I want the business to be, and we're not considering what we'll sell and what the customer wants, then we've missed the boat. And so same play with desired state.
Yeah.
Does our desired state achieve anything that the customer is willing to pay for? Otherwise, why are we in business? Because we're all in business to make money.
I think that's a really important piece. There's a piece of an infographic that we use. It's actually Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We've mapped it to security. And when you think about it, it's like, oh, okay, where does safety fit on the hierarchy of needs? It's after food, right? Like there are certain things of like, hey, we need essentials, and businesses need revenue, right? Without revenue, without that income, and people will hate when I say this, but I'm like, security is a luxury of successful companies. And if you are not a successful company, the top of your mind is not security. It's actually, hey, I got to make some revenue first, and then I got to secure this. And so it's this delicate balance. And so your desired state, though, I think slides across this continuum. If you lose all your customers, writing secure code is not going to be the top of the mind for all the executive staff. It's going to be, we need some customers so that we can, survive.
And at least so far, the government hasn't started subsidizing security to any great degree. So we're not going to get subsidies to grow the corn. So.
What do you think about all the regulations that are maturing as we speak, that are probably due out sometime in the first quarter, that are going to require companies to report these occurrences of breaches or incidents, and are going to really scrutinize, were they close enough to a reasonable desired state, as you might look at it in the eyes of something like CIS controls or NIST or something like that? I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on that topic.
Well, I mean, go ahead, Diane. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, I'm a huge fan of transparency. So if a company has been breached, then notifying who needs to get notified I'm very much all for that, especially when you've got what we have now, which is a very complex composite networks that we work on. So it's not unusual that you're contracting with a third party and their third party loses to some of your data, and they're like, well, they don't have the report down the chain, so you never even get alerted that your data was lost. So I like transparency. I think that's good. I would couch it with the caution, though, of if you force companies to report out too quickly before they've had the ability to really understand what's going on, you could actually put them and your own data and their customer data at more risk. Because the bad guys could be still in there. You could be giving them information that's helping them. You want to make sure that you've carefully understood, you've given the companies long enough time to understand what's happening so that they can report out completely and wholly. You also get into bad reputation. There was a company that got breached one time and they went on CNN pretty much immediately, and their spokesperson said one thing and then the next day had to walk it back, which really made it feel untrustworthy. So you want to avoid that. The other thing is that when and if we start regulating, were they at the right desired state? Were they, following proper guidance? Had they done, NIST 853 assessments, and where they basically had they done due diligence in terms of security program? That again, I think we have to be really careful on, because it's very easy to cut too broadly and have too many fines going against organizations, maybe dinging organizations that really couldn't have helped what the problem was. It wasn't in their control to stop the attacker. So I think we just have to be really careful as we implement these kinds of things. In theory, it's fantastic and transparency is good, but we have to be really careful that we don't push companies into talking too soon or fining them when maybe it wasn't really something that they needed to be fined for.
So I really have two pieces here. One, I think within security and cyber in general, we're really fast and really good at victim blaming. And it's a really, really bad thing. And what ends up happening is that people, and you get attorneys who will do everything possible to avoid that. So you get into the conversation of, well, that depends on what the definition of is. Right? Like, was it an incident? They were in the network, but they never got anything out. Okay, is that a breach? Like if you walk into your house and there's robbers in there, were you robbed? Now, they didn't steal anything, so maybe you weren't, right? Depends on the lawyer you have. But I also think that there is a broken trust model. And I think that the reason being is that the USG has not done in my opinion, a great job of being the bellwether of great security when we look at things like, some of the OPM breaches of the past, and the amount of money that's actually spent there, or even the collaboration that happens between public and private sector, where historically it's been, hey, private sector, tell us all the stuff, and we'll tell you a year later that all the indicators are, these are the things. You're like, well, we got them from our intel providers, so thanks a lot for nothing. So I think we end up in this victim blaming situation, and so then again we are left for commercial and private entities to solve that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I love that you brought out the word victim, because this is one of the few cases in certainly in American society where somebody is victimized and the law enforcement and the federal government treat them like the criminals. And there is a certain level of, you can't be negligent in many cases, or gross negligence, or however you want to look at it, but stop treating companies like victims. To Diane's point, there can be too quick a reporting, and it becomes almost like having cameras in the courtroom. And we get companies that end up getting tried reputationally in the media rather than actually waiting and getting the facts and having something happen. And as far as all these laws go, Josh, let's look at the laws critically. And if the government is going to require us to do something that does not actually contribute value, that cannot reasonably be considered a value add to the security posture, then make the government pay for it. If they want the law, fine, but they got to pay for it then.
Oh, not only the law, but the controls, right? I mean,
the controls,
the way they treat the DIB, right?
Yeah, make them pay.
The way they treat the industrial base, I mean, they are certainly going to demand, as I mentioned before, right, a very tough level of due diligence, and making them comply with new controls like CMMM C2 is now happening. And there's a whole new thing, that's going on with, they're not even sure what that is yet, but it's going to happen next quarter. And, a lot of these DIB contractors are starting to feel like we can never get there, right? Which is kind of, to steer it back to desired state a little bit here, they're all searching for technologies, solutions to this challenge. And you all, particularly Anthony and Diane, you are consulting with these organizations. And Pat, you're running a huge organization that has to implement this. What are the technologies that are coming to market now, or have been in the market for a little while, that are helping companies? Again, we can't call them a victim for trying and having a breach, right? That's not what should be happening here. But what are some of the things that we're seeing in the marketplace, specific technologies and things that should be used either in the cloud or in hybrid work environment to help make sure that we are operating in a more secure fashion and closer to this ideal notion of a desired state?
Well, I think we're seeing some movement by vendors, especially because of some of the blowback from things like Zoom and Ring and different places like vendors like that. They got blowback for not configuring their software offering in the most efficient and secure manner from the get-go, and require the owner then to deconfigure to a bad state rather than to get to a good state. And so I think we're going to see some of the vendors start to do things like that. I think by and large, the biggest thing that's going to help us is automation, when we start talking about RPA and SOAR, because as soon as we get things automated, push stuff down to the most rote set of tasks, we eliminate a lot of possibility for error. We eliminate a lot of those little oopses that are what's causing us all the breaches, because we only get breached and we only actually have a failure of availability or a failure of anything for one of two reasons. Somebody did something they weren't supposed to, or somebody didn't do something they were supposed to. So if we can automate that out and drive those tasks down to the lowest level, I think that's going to be a huge technology change as we get more and more mature in that area.
Yeah, I agree with automation, and also with looking at customers that are in a cloud. get to use those native tools and report out. And if you're a small company and you're cloud native and you were born in one cloud and you stick in that cloud, you've got wonderful embedded tools from that provider. And if you implement the CIS benchmarks that you were talking about, Josh, you've got a pretty good status of where you are, and you can report out. Azure gives you great tools, and here's your secure score. But larger companies, and I advise CISOs and CSOs at larger companies, they don't have a cloud. They are in the multi-cloud world, and GCP's tools look different, and their CIS benchmarks look different than Azure, look different than AWS, look different than Oracle. And so when you start getting into multi-cloud, I think what's really helping customers the most is being able to understand and use the native cloud tools. And thank goodness we're building security into our networks now instead of having to keep always adding on. But now you have to extract out the reporting and the benchmarks and do a crosswalk normalization about how you're set up in each one of these clouds based on how they report out with their tools, and make sure that your company has stasis across all of these different clouds. So tools that are helping companies be able to do that, I think, are where you're getting some really big benefit. The native tools from the providers are great, but they're just not layering the big picture together if you're in multiple clouds. So the tools that are helping companies be able to bring that view and see themselves cross cloud and see where they are, I think are some of the most helpful right now for desired state.
It's a great point. And Anthony, when we were getting prepped for this, I remember you saying to me, and it's not just cloud, right? We focus on cloud so much, but we're all dealing with hybrid environments at the enterprise level. We're dealing with work from anywhere effectively, and the notion of the traditional office has changed. So, and we all have private cloud environments in addition to public cloud in many cases.
Also, it's the people factor, right? Like it's easy for us to sit here and be like, oh, if you were in 5 different cloud environments, you have to have the expertise and knowledge to know how to use those native tools. Now go ahead and try to recruit teams that understand each one of those. And then you get back to, okay, I can't afford it. It's very expensive, super competitive. Because of the work environment, you're seeing people hire entire teams. I was talking to a security leader recently, and their engineering function hired an entire team from another company, which was all at once, right? And so you're sitting there and you've got, oh, great, we just did our performance reviews and all the people dependencies, like 5 people just left. You have to come up with automation to enable you to be successful in this. Otherwise, you're constantly behind the curve here.
We do have a question from the audience that I think would be interesting. So I'm going to read it out here and see if you guys want to discuss this. Curious, when would the executive order on cybersecurity requiring consistent log gathering and ultimately the analysis around that massive amount of data be a help or a hindrance to, quote, desired state?
I think it's much more of a kind of a CYA scenario for the federal government to make work than anything else, because at some point it becomes noise, and so what are they going to do with respect to retention and destruction on this kind of data too? Are they going to now say that, well, it needs to be retained 3 years like your tax records, and if they go back 3 years and they find something, now they can jump back another 3 years and they can continue down the pipeline? So how long do you actually have to store this data and contain this data? And that becomes a scenario too where we seem to lax security as data gets older and older, and so it gets moved to maybe a less secure place, and then it gets taken from that less secure place. So I think the executive order is more show than anything of real value myself.
Yeah, I think it's my question is, and it goes back to like this thing people, I love when people say, it's like, well, how much data is enough or how much data is too much? And like, what are you going to do with it? And that's my question on this. Like, what is the federal government going to do with this? Right. I mean, not to pick on the USG, but like the first federal CISO was appointed 4 years ago. Right. I haven't seen any trailblazing, hey, this is the way we're going to shape the world type of activities there. I do think there's some tremendous things that can happen for like the MSP type of world, right, to help kind of raise the level, because you have restaurant people that they want to run a restaurant. They don't want to think about how am I encrypting the credit card. But let a breach happen, and you're gonna have attorney generals go to somebody who owns 2 restaurants and find the heck out of them. Like that, this doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like, what are we actually going to do with this data? How's it going to be used? And how's it not going to turn into cherry picking for lawsuits and fines? Because that's where I see this going.
Well, in Europe, they called that GDPR. That's how they raise money to support the EU, is they fine people under GDPR for bogus, ridiculous things. And that's how they finance the EU.
Yeah, log files are rich, rich soil. Yeah, I think it was the Verizon DIBR, the data breach incident report. I think that they said it was 80% of attacks that Verizon had gone in on. After the fact, they could look back at the logs and see that there were tells and alerts within the logs that if the victim company had been able to identify, they might have been able to stop the attack earlier. So this is some really rich soil. But as Pat and Anthony are saying, we want to be careful with how that data, I mean, it is rich soil. How is that data going to be used? And is it going to be cherry picked to go after people? There's been good analysis that there was a lot of chatter in the run up to the 9/11 attack on the World Trade Center, that there was chatter that could have indicated that this attack was going to happen. Now, was the government going to go back and say, oh, we completely failed, we didn't see that? It was more of a, hey, sometimes when you've got a lot of noise, it's really hard to figure out what signal. And that happens in log collection too. It's rich with data, but it's very hard sometimes to get the signal. So even if a company had an alert in the log file, were they able to hear that and understand it was a true alert? That's a big difference. So making sure that we don't, after the fact, go back and say, well, this company really should have known, look, it was right here in this log file. That's going to be, I think, a concern that you want to make sure.
Hindsight's always 20/20.
Right.
Right. Great. Log files are obviously great for a look back, but I mean, what are security leaders doing and companies needing to do right now in order to be proactive looking forward, to achieve this desired state or to come as close as possible, right, to maintain these systems? I mean, my question to all of you would be, in your roles, what are you advising both internally at your company, Pat, or for Diane and for Anthony, externally to customers? What are you advising that leaders focus on first in IT security?
Well, I mean, I go back to looking at this idea of, to be attacked, well, not to be attacked, but to be exploited. Somebody did something they weren't supposed to do at your company, or somebody didn't do something they were supposed to do at your company. And so, it comes back to that people factor, and we hate to beat the drum on that, but, insider risk management, that's where the real, rubber meets the road for me, is looking at the idea of improving our technology with respect to behavioral analytics so that we can get more predictive and consume more sources of data, not just looking at network traffic and not just looking at access logs and application logs, but being able to pull in information regarding employee absenteeism and performance reviews and badge access to building timing and things like that, and be able to correlate all of that. Now, there are lots of legal issues from a privacy point of view that you have to overcome to get there, but that's where I think we'll have the biggest impact in stemming the tide on breaches.
What we're advising people, and actually it's the same model that actually shared with the Federal Reserve a couple months back, is actually aligned with everyone loves a grid and a matrix. We call it a 4x4. Really, it's there's 4 reasons why companies get hacked, right, or attacked, and it's intellectual property theft, money, destruction. They want to see the world burn. But really, the important piece is actually the 4 levels of actor. We call them Joey, Joe, Joseph, and Yosef. Joey is that 12-year-old kid. And if it's a complexity that a 12-year-old kid can go get free on YouTube, they can download some tool, that is negligence. There's no security leader program in the world that should be able to walk up to their board and say, listen, we got beat up by 4 12-year-olds. They had a bunch of free tools and they downloaded some cool stuff, right? Joe, and you take that along that spectrum, Joey becomes that, or Joe becomes that, 19-year-old cis, person in college. And the way Yosef, a true nation state trained threat actor, exfils data or does command and control is very different than a Joey level attack. And a Joey level attack and a Joe level attack, those are things that I think are right there and should be automated out. We should never have to talk about them. But that Joseph, somebody who's been with your company for 30 years, that's hard. That's somebody who built that network and infrastructure, and good luck finding that if they're really pissed off. So that's where we kind of the model that we use and share, but it gets into the heart of automating all the stuff that should be easy. That's the definition of negligence. And then you have to have smart, good people and custom rules to really identify those more advanced techniques. Yeah.
It's interesting. We also have sort of a 4-point approach, and anytime that a customer comes to us to get started with the vCISO work, we look at 4 really important things as they relate to that company. The first one is, what business are they in and what do they want to accomplish? As Pat said, they want to make more money. Of course they do. But how has the board and the executive team determined they're going to make that more money? Because once you understand the goals of the company, that actually can help with your strategy. The second piece is understanding the compliance and regulatory impacts on that organization. Sometimes they don't always know. A lot of times, certainly early in GDPR, there was a lot of but we're not in Europe. Yeah. So helping them understand that, helping them understand the threat landscape, a lot of what Anthony was just talking about, who's after you, what kind of resources they have. And then very importantly, understanding where they are right now. So performing an assessment on the company to see where their big exposures are. Because very often when you're hiring a vCISO, it's because you haven't had a real security mindset or lens yet. So helping them see, look, these are the really big exposures, because a lot of companies don't understand where they're most at risk. They don't understand some things that, for us, all of us that, we work in this every day, it's kind of mind-boggling, but I can't tell you how many, and this happened even when I was working at Microsoft, how many executives have said to me, we're in AWS, we're in Azure, therefore we're safe. And I said, well, yeah, but how did you configure your estate in Azure? Have you run SecureScore if you're at Microsoft? Have you used the security tools at AWS? Well, no, we're at AWS, it's secure, Azure's secure. Yeah, the cloud is secure, but it's a shared responsibility model. So that assessment part really helps as they begin to understand where their company is insecure. And then once you've got all these 4 dimensions worked out and identified, now you can start to figure out where the company wants to spend the money on security, because no company can spend enough money to secure, to get to the secure state that they really want to most of the time. Even wealthy financial services companies have to make trade-offs. So with those 4 pieces defined, talk to the executives, now you can build a strategy out on where you really want to focus the limited resources that you have, so that you're supporting the high priority security exposures or material findings, but simultaneously making sure that you understand what threats are coming down, the compliance, and importantly, is that going to also support the key growth areas for the company that year?
And remind them straight up that AWS does not stand for All's Well Security.
Yeah. It's I don't know if you guys are seeing this as much as I do, but it breaks my heart every time. And I've had companies that we were thinking of doing business with, when I say, are you compliant, what, and they say, well, we're running on AWS and look at all the certifications AWS has. That's great. But how about your company? But we're running on AWS.
And it goes beyond security, though. It goes to just technology in general. People have customarily looked at cloud environments and just assumed that everything is perfect in the world. We even just talking about availability and resilience, and looking at your DR and your storage, your storage and things like that. They just go, oh, it's AWS, or oh, it's Azure, oh, it's whatever. Well, no, you have the same thing, whether it's security or whether it's just using the technology. If you don't know how to drive the car, don't get in it.
Yes.
That's a great point, Pat. And to bring it back a little bit towards desired state, when we talk about DR, BCP, recovery, right, options, what happens when you have a bad day, right? You have a bad day, and a lot of things are potentially blown away or compromised or need to be thrown out, right? How do you get back to where you were even, right? So there's certainly something that is near and dear to my heart and something we're focused on, but I'm curious, what are some technologies that you all are seeing being put in place that really help companies get back to even the current state, hopefully further ahead to a full desired state, but how do they recover after a bad day, and what are things they can be doing to put in place to be in a better position for that?
Yeah, so I think it's actually, and I think we talked about this just briefly before, where we're kind of at as an industry is almost where we were, I want to say like 13 years ago with when we were talking about like laptops and malware, right? In 2007, 2008, a lot of companies were like, oh, whenever we get a malware, we're going to forensically image and analyze each piece of malware. And then after a while, you realize like, I can't keep up with this. There's way too many of these laptops getting infected. Just blow them away. Just re-image them and get them back out, because we're not trying to be a cybersecurity company. We're trying to be a company that provides parts or a service or a good. And we're now spending most of our time doing this forensic analysis. And I think that companies today are in the same vein of kind of saying, hey, how much time and effort are we going to spend really digging into every time there's a possible alert and analysis, and maybe we just restore. So restoration, I think, in you know, that reconciliation piece is a recovery piece, is where we're going. It has to get faster, and they're using the native tools within the cloud. Now, the one thing I do want to call out is that people have to recognize that not all clouds are created equal, right? It's one thing to say, hey, we're in Azure, we're in GCP, we're in AWS, awesome. If you're a large financial service organization or a Fortune 1500 company, and you see that you have assets in DigitalOcean, I really question what your program is doing, because that organization doesn't have the same level of tools that the higher tier does. So that's an important piece, and that goes to the recovery, that goes to the restoration. But it you know, that integration and recovery is a big focus.
Yeah, Josh, the wrong answer to how do you deal with that is that you take your increased budget and you buy your way back out of the hole. But that's what we tend to do. That's what we see a lot, is all of a sudden, you know, the board releases and the executives release all kinds of money, and they say, buy this great new thing. I read this in the Wall Street Journal. I read this in Forbes. It's supposed to be good. So why don't you have this yet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they try and buy their way back out and never really establish a good solid plan for desired state.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually one of my favorite questions, Pat, is, you know, I used to call it the in-flight magazine problem.
Yeah.
Right. What do you do when, you know, someone on the executive leadership team or the board comes back and they're like, yo, I read in such and such magazine that, you know, this is a great technology, we should have it. You've got your whole security program planned out or your budget for next year all kind of assigned, and they start questioning you based on something that they read or picked up along the way. How do you deal with those moments in the boardroom?
So, I mean, yeah, that's a very, I used to call it the golf course, because it was, you know, some executive was out playing golf and got enamored of the latest technology. And I actually have that, I've run into that a lot less frequently in the past few years. I think really early on, especially the 90s, when security was so new and it was like, oh, PKI must be the how I'm going to solve everything. You know, you've got a little bit less of that at RSA, where it seems like there's a product that everybody's pushing, or, you know, I mean, we've got some buzzwords, right? We have zero trust, but we know that's an approach and an architecture, not a product. You know, the principle of least privilege, again, it's approach, not it. Products can help you implement it. So I think that it's getting a little bit easier when the execs come in, but still, I mean, blockchain was one where it's suddenly, it was like, everybody's like, well, can't we just solve that all with blockchain now? Are we done? So when you get that, it can be a little bit sticky and tricky if it's the CEO who's decided that this is the only way to go, and they clearly don't understand the tech. So sitting them down and understanding the tech explaining the tech also doesn't work super well, because they're not interested in that. They're interested in like this blanket. So I find it's most helpful to step back and say, look, let's look at our strategy. Let's see how that might work into, even though blockchain, if it's completely wrong for that company, if you say to an exec, no, you're wrong, just a wall goes up. So let's explore what our goals are, what we want to accomplish. How could blockchain do that? And generally the answer is it can't. But at least that gets you to have a conversation with them instead of just putting up a brick wall.
I think that it was probably maybe like 6 years ago, even you'd had a lot more boards that would hear this message and then they would come and go ask these questions. And now they've been trained a lot to kind of back out. The challenge, though, I think, is when you get organizations that have investment arms that say, hey, we just wrote a check for $30 million into this great tech.
Yeah.
When are we going to deploy it? And you're like, one, we would have recommended you invested in this. Two, it doesn't align with our strategy, right? So that's where it becomes a really messy piece. And you see companies, you're like, why did they, their investment arm just invested something last quarter. I know what they're buying next quarter.
Yeah.
And the airline magazine, Josh, is the old saying of believe nothing that you hear and only half of what you see. So, they're not using reliable sources, and you have to gently and tactfully help them understand that reliable sources are credible subject matter expertises like us, the CISOs, not the airline magazine.
I will say, I want to hang out with Pat just to take like a bunch of book of Pat notes. Like,
right. Pat aphorisms. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great point. We do have another question from the audience. What should IT leaders be planning for in 2022 when bringing employees back into the office? And for security, is this an opportunity or a headache?
I think we ought to be planning for not fully bringing them back in the office. I think that's our plan. I think if you're trying to come back in 5 days a week, the whole year, then you're going to start losing all your good people. You won't be able to hire people. And so I think the biggest part of your plan is how are you going to adapt your culture so that it satisfies this need to be a hybrid work environment where, you come in a couple of days a week, you're perfectly okay with hiring outside of your locality, which opens up your market for hiring like crazy if you're willing to bring in remote people. And I think that's going to be the way we plan for people coming back, is not bringing them back full force.
Yeah, I mean, the work from anywhere mindset, I think just plan for that. The reason a lot of companies got caught out was they thought that they had work from anywhere, and really they had mobile workers, not remote workers. So just plan in the future to have at least a portion of your workforce remote. Even if you're a small company, a lot of times small companies, they think, well, that's never going to be us, right? But as you scale, you're going to have to be more flexible, as Pat says. So I think that's a critical one. Segmentation, and continuing to embrace and deploy segmentation at all different layers and in different, so on-prem, in your wireless networks, but also in your cloud instances. I think that's really going to be very, very important to look at that. And then the other thing that I hope that more companies are your backups, your incident response, obviously training those and practicing them, because a lot of companies have them and they're not practicing, they're not testing. But the sort of the next gen thing that I think companies need to start being even more aware about is what's going on in their AI and ML supply chain, because we are putting a lot of trust in these systems, and these systems are incredible. And we are able to go through so much more data, so much more quickly, especially in security, ML, and being able to use probability analysis on log files is really giving us a chance to catch up with this tsunami of data that we have to manage. But these systems are not infallible. How they're made, how they're tested really, really matters. And it feels like magic to a lot of organizations. And I think it was Anthony was mentioning, or maybe Pat too, was mentioning resources. We just don't have enough people working in security that know enough of the things we all need to know, or the deep dive into an area. AI and ML security and data science security are really new emerging areas, and we're putting a lot of trust in some of these systems. So that's another thing, is anyone listening, if you haven't thought about getting some people that are smart about AI and ML at your company to help you figure out what all these great, we can solve all of your problems magically, I strongly recommend to do that, because before you buy them and use them, you want to understand them.
There is something, I think this is more of a society component, and maybe it's just humans as a species. Like, we are good at solving, as a species, solving human capital problems eventually, right? Like, you can kind of think about like printing press, and you're like, we just didn't have enough people to copy and write books. And we're like, oh, okay, printing press, boom. And then all of a sudden the world revolutionizes, and we can do things at scale. And so the longer we have human capital problems, I think the more incentivized you have people to say, well, is there a way to automate this? Is there a different approach to this? And I do think that it is important for organizations to figure out how they strike this balance of remote workers and on-prem. Because every person I've asked this question to kind of ends up with the same answer. If you had $100,000 to invest in a company, would you invest in a team that sat together 5 days a week, or would you invest in a team that was fully remote? Which one do you think would have a better product? And most everyone says, well, I think the people who actually sit together, they're probably going to have better camaraderie and do the things and da. And so we're going to have to wrestle with this as industry. We're gonna have to wrestle with this with team dynamics, and we have to wrestle with this with attrition, because company loyalty is dramatically different now. When you can just say, "Hey, I no longer have friends I go to lunch with. I just dial into a different set of Zoom meetings."
I think we have another opportunity we've missed over the years too, with respect to the whole area of security awareness. We have always taught security awareness from the business-centric, business perimeter point of view, and now we have a much greater opportunity and need to start focusing on, let's teach people how to be secure at home in their life. Let's teach them how to be secure with their IoT devices and everything hanging around their houses, and how to be secure with their banking, and just everything about, because what you teach, what you do at work does not necessarily translate to your house, your personal life. But what you do in your personal life does translate.
Pat, it's a great point. It's something I've been actually preaching for years now, since I was CTO at Hellman and Freeman. I mean, I used to talk about it all the time. And, I would do that. I would try to get everybody in the organization to teach friends and family at home. It was hard. I think it's got much easier with the proliferation of everybody going to work from anywhere based on this pandemic, to get people to think about it. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's a missed opportunity. And I think there's so much more that can be done there. I mean, the old IBM commercial where the daughter walks into the CEO's office because she's visiting and says, they're having a big security problem. They turn around and they're like, oh, Daddy, I was just playing a video game on my iPad on the network, right? It's that stuff. And if we don't get it out there to everybody in a format where we are, as security professionals, talking to them about it, like you would explain it to your 6-year-old at home, right? And I think we sometimes overcomplicate the message. But what I wanted to ask you specifically, Pat, is you mentioned we shouldn't go to, and I agree with you, to bringing everybody back into the office. All these organizations that we're all working with have moved to some kind of hybrid. They've dealt with the VPN issues and overstretched VPNs, and people move out, and there's been a lot of attention on that. Is the job done?
No.
Or are you seeing a lot of things that need to be done? And specifically, what are some of those things if we're going to continue to exist like this in the new normal?
Yeah, I don't think the job is done as long as we continue to see advertisements for jobs at all levels that parenthetically say on site. That's problematic, because you're not going to get the benefit of the hybrid environment doing that, and frankly, the new generation of people at work are not going to tolerate it. They've got better things to do than sit an hour or 2 hours in traffic on the road. So no, I think we've got plenty of work that we can do. We've got to make it easy. I know if I'm in a crunch, I can take my cell phone with me, and I can do 100% of what I can do at work. I can do off my cell phone, May not be as easy because I can't type with thumbs as quickly as I can with 2 extra fingers, but I can do it. I can access, I can do things that I need to do. And that's the kind of stuff that we still don't have pushed down to all of the environments in the world. And some of the big companies do, but it's not necessarily pushed all the way down yet.
Yeah, and I keep hearing it's creating a lot of inconvenience. Some of the security controls that were really designed to keep that kind of work for corporate professionals in the office. Right now, we're trying to push it out to the edge, and we're using some of the same legacy technologies, and their users are having a very difficult experience getting access to what they need. So, Anthony,
Yeah,
what are some things you think we could do?
it also, I mean, going back to your topic originally about government regulation requirements, right? Like this is actual conversation we had again with the Fed, was how much, like if you have somebody at a bank who's responsible for fund transfers, should the bank try to do a background check on their roommates? And if their roommate was convicted of wire fraud, is the bank liable or responsible for that? Because we've lost the domain of physical controls. People don't regularly control alt delete lock their machine at home, right? And you might have a kid, a teenager, a neighbor, a babysitter, somebody come over and be like, oh, I can move $400,000 over here, totally get away with this type of thing. And so there's a lot that has to go into how we think about security holistically in this new environment. And security leaders have to look at this. Again, going back into, can we train them? How do we automate? Like, how do we get humans out of this loop as much as possible? Because it is a totally different world. That we're
Josh, I think we have a new marketing term to deal with. We've been through AI and ML and zero trust and everything else. I think we ought to start working on selling edgeless security.
I like that.
I think we can sell the heck out of that one. I don't know what it is, and I'm not sure what it would look like, but it's catchy enough that I think we can sell it.
Someone's going to want to buy it. That's
Yeah.
going to be, that's an airline magazine buzzword right there.
edgeless security. I like it.
So I got one more question from the audience. And after that, I'm going to move to a wrap up, but I'd like you all to try to respond to this one. I think it's a great question. If you had $200,000 to invest in achieving desired state, what would you invest in for next year? AI, ML, automation, blockchain, something else? Where would you put that first $200,000 of investment? Anthony, why don't you start?
So as an investor, I've been making investments in automation technology solutions. So that is a really big piece here for me. And it's why I'm one of the such a big supporter of what Aiden's doing. I think that we have to look at enabling people to do and be more, and to get back to solving the bigger, tougher, more complicated problems. So automation has to be the thing. The risk for me with AI and ML is it's just like blockchain. People use it like hot sauce. Like they try to put it on everything, and they're like, and it's you can't just AI your way out of everything. You can't ML your way out of everything, right? And so I think that you have to kind of figure out, what are you trying to do? And I think automation for me is what resonates the most.
AI hot sauce. I'm going to remember that, Anthony.
Yeah, I would jump out, and I mean, there's two areas I would look at first. One is I love the new technologies, not so new, but new to most companies because they haven't implemented yet, of data tagging and labeling for unstructured data, like Microsoft MIP and so forth. I think that's great when we get to a point where we have that quote embedded DNA of access in access control in the document itself, so that it can never get away from you. Really, that would be a really great technology. But in hand with that, you've got to invest in your IAM technology to make sure that you're supporting that authentication and authorization process through. And we want to get away from passwords eventually, because they're useless if you make easy passwords. So we want to create some way where we encourage people to use super complex passwords, and then they just don't have to change it because they're doing multi-factor or whatever else the case may be. So that's where I'd spend money.
Pat, I think I have another marketing term for you for the data loss prevention piece, which is mind reading enablement.
Yeah, yeah, there we go.
Diana, what were you going to say for that?
So look, I mean, not to sound like a lawyer, but how to spend that $200,000 depends on what that company is doing and where they want to go. So for each company that I VC with, I would spend that $200,000 with agreement of their executives in a different way. But it's never a bad thing to spend, at least if you haven't had a recent assessment, you don't have a program and a strategy in place, start there, because that's going to tell you which technology to focus on. Hygiene, it's probably not the hot sauce or the sparkly fairy dust of ML that's going to get you out of your problems or blockchain. It's going to be looking at your hygiene overall, making sure that your configurations are set right, that you've got automation where you need it, that you've got information protection. So then, hygiene is that next one. And then I do think, and actually it was something that triggered me from Pat, if any company that isn't using some kind of password manager to enable your employees to use very long, complicated passphrases or passwords coupled with MFA, that's a must buy for everybody to get something like that deployed out, because passwords and account takeovers are big, huge, and password stuffing. The attackers are doing that. So I think that almost every company needs that. So if you don't have that, that's something everybody can do. But as far as the
inside and out,
yeah,
yes.
Because the password stuffing that works so often because people have a favorite password, they use it at work and at home.
Well, and I like to say, the third thing, right? You have two very important things there. And I always say those two, the passwords and the MFA, but also keeping your software up to date and inside and out also, right? I think we don't do enough, to Pat's point, of telling our families, if you're running old stuff on your personal computers on the same network, you're creating the same problem, right? So with that, I'd really like to do a quick wrap up. And I do have some key takeaways that I think I'd like to share with everybody who's listening out there, in case they missed some of it or logged in late or whatever. Anthony had a great comment about not to disparage the US government, but we can't really rely on the US government to be the best bellwether of great security. Not so much, right? They certainly don't have the track record. And so I think that forces us all to look at industry for where these things are coming out of. Pat, cameras in the courtroom, right? You talked about that. And automation can help us, SOAR and RPA, get out of this mess, right? And not allowing the government to get too far into the shorts of industry and put cameras in the courtroom, but solving our own problems with these new technologies and embracing them. Diana, you came to reporting across all ecosystems and clouds, which I thought was a fantastic comment. We may be in different cloud environments, GCP, AWS, or Azure, wherever we are, or someone else, like Anthony mentioned, another vendor. We need to correlate and analyze data across all of those various sources. Otherwise, we can't look at any one of them in isolation, or we don't understand the full picture. And Pat, you talked about insider risk management, behavior analytics really being something that, we can use behavioral analytics and ML to really look at what's happening, things like DLP, other kinds of behavioral challenges internally. Anthony, you parlayed on that really well. I love your analogy of Joey, Joe, and Joseph, right? The different levels of sophistication. The fact that we need to really be planning our insider threat or insider risk approach for mitigating those concerns based on the level of sophistication we're trying to solve for. Diana, you had the 4-point approach, which I thought was fantastic. What businesses are really doing, what are their crown jewels, looking at regulatory forces upon them, the threat landscape, and the current state of assessment that they're going through is the fourth thing in the pillar. I think that's fantastic. And you mentioned the cloud is secure. Sure, we can point to these security models at these large cloud providers, but security is a shared responsibility. And we need to be asking ourselves, how are we taking an active part as organizations that are using those services? And continuing to embrace and employ segmentation, which I agree wholeheartedly. I think on the network level, segmentation in everything makes so much sense. And that was actually a technology we didn't talk about today, but there are segmentation technologies, right? Like Guardicore and a couple of others that are out there. IR, incident response plans, war rooming, or tabletop exercises, and really planning the AI and ML supply chain helps us catch up with the tsunami. But once we have the data and can analyze it, now what are we doing about it when there's an actual reason to use it? And Anthony, you had a great comment about, as a species, we are great at solving human capital problems. And so you're investing in automation. And by the way, we appreciate your support at Aiden. But I just think that it's true, right? Automation is something we do as a society from the early days, right? We don't walk anymore. We take a car or a train. We have to get there in the technology and security landscapes as well. And Pat, you really had a great marketing comment here about the work from home or work from anywhere environment, which is edgeless security in everything we're doing, in the technology stack, but in the awareness that we're generating with friends and family and everybody else at home. And with that, we don't have a lot of time yet left. We are right at the top of the hour, but I did promise that I would make a quick announcement at the end. So I'm just going to let everybody know, Aiden has something coming out very shortly we're in beta with, called Aiden Cloud, where we have, and that is our big announcement coming out today. We are enabling the modern workforce to do desired state configuration on endpoints using Aiden technology from the cloud. And that's based on some technology that we've built with help from Microsoft a little bit, Microsoft for Startups. And it is based on an Azure solution. And it will be coming to market in January. There'll be sales announcements and things like that. But we're very excited about it, as we can, think we can help a lot of companies that are working from anywhere, dealing with hybrid workforce and all of this by leveraging our solution from the cloud. And with that, any final thoughts? I'm just going to go around real quick.
Nope.
Why don't I start with you, Pat? Any final thoughts?
Nothing really to add. I think we've covered all the bases. It's a good thing Anthony and Diana were here to catch all the tough questions. I was glad to take the easy ones.
Thank you. Diana?
Just to remember, it's a desired state. It is it's a journey, and don't don't get caught up in trying to be perfect, right? It's really just about getting to a better state, a desired state, not a perfection state.
Thank you. Anthony?
I think that's the best summary of it. It really is a journey.